Hey y'all, Kenny here. Thanks for joining me. A friend of mine asked me recently to build a bow for his brother, so I thought why not ask you guys to tag along. I'm not going to do an in-depth bow building video, just hit the highlights, so stay tuned. So I prefer to build self bows, but you have to have seasoned staves in order to do that, and I don't at the moment. In fact, I've gotten a little slack about harvesting wood and getting it dried. So I'm going to build this bow from maple lumber. This board is quarter sawn. I would prefer flat sawn, but I'm going to build the bow and just see how that works. I'm going to build the bow similar to this design. The main body will be maple. I'm also going to use maple for the back, which is probably not the best choice, but I'm going to see how it pans out. I'm going to give it a reverse handle, and I also glue my bows up in a reflex. I'll show you that jig that I built later on in the video. That makes the bow shoot much faster. You don't have very much string follow after you get the bow built, but you also have a bow that's under a lot of stress. So if the wood is not perfect, there is a chance that you could have a failure. So the belly of the bow is maple, and I have tapered it from the center to the limb tips. And I will tell you a good formula to go by here is about 1/8 of an inch of taper every 12 inches. And actually it'll floor tiller pretty well with those dimensions. So I'm starting out here at about 1/2 inch, and then I'm tapering out to about 1/4 of an inch at the tip of the limb. I've sanded a piece of wood for my riser. This will be sandwiched between the belly wood and the back on this bow. I also have made a couple of wedges to glue up here near the limb tips to thicken them up, and I found that you get a lot better string wear if you have a thick limb up near the tip. This is the wood for the back of the bow. It's maple as well. I heated it up and bent it the kind of the shape of this handle section, just so it would be easier to get glued up when I put it in the form. Now, I normally make the back of my bow the same thickness all the way down, usually about 1/8 of an inch, but I've never used maple for a backing, and especially quarter sawn. So I made this 1/4 inch thick in the center, and I tapered it to 1/8 of an inch where the stress is less up here on the limb. And I'm going to see how that works out. You know, that's how we learn new things, by experimentation. So I've gone ahead and glued the riser section on the belly wood, as well as these reinforcements up here on the tip of the limb. And I'm using Tight Bond wood glue, the original. I know there's some new and improved stuff out there, but I've been using this in my guitars and bows for probably 25 plus years without any failure. So if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Earlier when I was talking about gluing a bow up in a reflex, I said that the wood needed to be perfect because it was under such stress, and that may be a bit of an exaggeration. Just be careful in the wood selection if you're going to build a bow. You don't want anything where the grain runs off the board abruptly. I've drawn a line on this maple where the grain goes, and this is acceptable. But if you have abrupt runoff like I've drawn on this other line, that's a no-no. You're asking for trouble. The same's true on the edge of the board. Gradual's okay, abrupt is not. What is the best bow wood? Well, that's all a matter of opinion, but for a beginner I would suggest hickory because you can make some mistakes with hickory and the bow will still survive. That's why a lot of people use hickory as a bow backing material. So to recap where I'm at up to this point, I started out with a 1-inch board. I cut this belly wood out. It's a 1/2 inch thick. It tapers 1/8 inch per 12 inches of limb. And so I'm about 1/4 of an inch at the end. I'm a 1/2 inch in the center. This riser block is a 1/2 inch thick. It is 10 inches long. These limb tips pieces are about 3.5 inches long and 1/4 inch thick. Once I got those glued on, I use a block and some sandpaper to feather them out so I get a good glue joint there. The back is tapered from a quarter in the center to an eighth at the end. Again, you don't have to do that. That's just something new I wanted to try, see how it works out. I think a self bow is actually easier to build than a bow from lumber, but a lot of people choose to build their first bow this way because it's pretty easy to go find a board locally to make a bow from. You don't have to cut a tree, split it, and wait for the staves to season, or invest a lot of money in a good quality stave and have it shipped. I built my first bow from a red oak board that I got at the home improvement store, and I built that bow using a machete, a pocket knife, and a rasp, and I took a couple deer with that bow that year. I used a bandsaw to profile this bow. That is the easiest way, but if you don't have access to a bandsaw, maybe you can phone a friend. If not, you can do it all by hand. As I said, I used a machete to build a bow once, but you could use a draw knife, a spoke shave, a block plane. A little tip when using any one of these tools is that you work diagonally across the bow limb and don't run straight in line with the grain. You run a risk of having tear out if you do. This is my form. It's made out of a 2x12. It has 3 inches of reflex, and to get that, I took, I think, a 12-foot piece of string, tied a loop in one end and stuck a screwdriver in the ground. Put my pencil on the other end of that 12-foot string, laid this board down, and drew a circle. I drilled these holes in it for my clamps to go in. I have this section cut out because I'm doing reverse handle. If I'm not doing reverse handle, I'm doing the handle on the belly of the bow. I can put a piece of wood in there to fill that in. I'm going to use a fire hose and air pressure for my glue up. The only reason I'm doing that is I built fiberglass laminated bows years ago, and I have the hose. The easiest way probably to clamp your wood down, besides using a lot of C-clamps, would be to buy some surgical tubing. You can drive nails along your form, and you just lace that surgical tubing on from end to end. Come back just like you're lacing your shoes. You get an X pattern. But if you do that and you're going to glue in reflex, I would reverse this form so that my surgical tubing is pressing against the backing on the bow and not the belly. You'll get a better glue joint that way. I have my glue on. I put it on both pieces. I'm generous with glue because glue is cheap. I'm using a little bit of electrical tape to help hold all this together while I position it in the form. And you don't have to be in a great big hurry to get this all together unless it's in really hot weather. Especially if you applied glue to both sides, it'll take about 20 minutes for this stuff to set up. There it is in the form, all glued up. I have a reinforcement board on top. I have about 10 psi of air in my fire hose, just enough to close up the glue joint. You don't need anything this elaborate to build a bow from lumber. If you're going to build it without reflex, you don't even really need a form. You can just use a piece of wood to reinforce the back and clamp it together. Or you can put it on a board and use the surgical tubing to clamp it down. Just whatever works best for you. All I can do now is wait for the glue to dry. I'll probably take it out of the form in a couple of days, but I won't work on it. I won't begin the tillering process for a couple of weeks because I want all the moisture from this glue to get out of the wood. So if you're interested in seeing this through, subscribe to my channel. Again, thanks for watching.